Hi guys, how you doing? It's been a few weeks. I'm Jacob Wickerham, the preaching intern here at FCC. I'm going to be filling in for Britt for a few weeks or months. We'll just see what happens, but he has a lot on his plate and I'm more than willing to help. Anyways, today we're going to be reading from John 13. It's a pretty large chapter, but it all hits upon one major theme, so we're going to read the entire chapter. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave the world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began washing his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You don't realize what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you will have no part of me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have already had a bath need only wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that is why he said not everyone was clean. Okay, so we're going to pause here. As we study John 13, I'm going to break the text up into sections and say a few words in between. So here's my first note. Jesus was in a really dusty region where sandals was the most common footwear. So it really didn't take long to dirty up your feet, and that's why foot washing was such a common practice. Another note, foot washing was reserved for the lowest of menial servants. You didn't wash the feet of someone who was your equal unless you really, really wanted to show a strong display of affection for them. And that's exactly what Jesus was doing in John 13. He was showing his great love for his disciples by humbling himself. There are so many lessons we could learn from Jesus' example, like no one is too important or above doing even the most despised or grimy work. This includes scrubbing toilets, taking out the trash, cleaning the gutters, and really anything. These chores aren't just reserved for the minimum wage worker. Even Jesus himself did such things. One more thing before we move on. John adds an interesting line of dialogue between Jesus and Peter. Christ said, "Unless I wash you, you have no part of me." Now, I'm not entirely sure what Jesus was getting at, but it seems like he was performing some type of spiritual cleansing via the foot washing. That's what several Bible commentators said as I was researching this passage. And it makes sense considering all that would happen to Jesus and his disciples in the near future. And actually, while we're on the topic, you have to appreciate verse 11. I mean, did you catch that earlier? I mean, Jesus really called out Judas with kind of like a sideways glare. He said, "Those who have had a bath need only wash their feet, their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." I mean, Jesus didn't yet blow Judas' cover, but Judas was probably sweating in his sandals. Also remember that dining together was all about personal intimacy. You typically didn't eat with people if you were on bad terms with them. Yet Judas the betrayer was pretending like nothing was wrong as he dined with Jesus. Before I ramble on too long, let's get back into the text. When Jesus had finished washing their feet, he put on clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should wash one another's feet. I've set an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them. I am not referring to all of you. I know those I have chosen. But this is to fulfill the passage of Scripture. He who has shared my bread has turned against me. I am telling you now, before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am who I am. Very truly I tell you, whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me. After he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, Very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. One moment. Okay, so first Jesus tells his disciples that they will be joyful and blessed if they follow the Master's example of service and loving humility. But then he continues, hey, listen, I'm soon going to be betrayed in accordance with the Scripture. And actually, Psalm 41:9 is the scripture he's referencing. It was originally about David. The psalm consisted of several sections of confidence, prayer, and lament. It was a mixed bag of emotions, and it fit Jesus' situation really well. But anyways, Jesus is troubled in spirit. He stops with the allusions, the hinting, the suggestions. He just comes right out and says it. Very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. John MacArthur makes an interesting note here. The word troubled is actually quite strong. It's not just like, I'm about to be betrayed, wow, this mildly bothers me. No, that's not at all what it means. It means I'm experiencing horror, agitation, and anxiety. The entire scene was heart-wrenching for Jesus. He loved his disciples. He wanted to spend time with them. He wanted to share a meal with them. He wanted to fellowship with them. But he just couldn't. He was too upset. He was perturbed. He was disturbed. Thoughts of betrayal were bouncing around in his mind. And to top it all off, his dummy disciples weren't getting it. After 3 years of rigorous discipleship, they had fallen short on so many fronts. And it was just so sad. Returning to the text. His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant when he said that he would soon be betrayed. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, Ask him which one he means. So, leaning back against Jesus, John speaks, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, It is the one to whom I give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish. Then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered him. So Jesus told him, What you are about to do quickly. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what he needed for the festival or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. This section of John 13 is something else. First, you have to grin at verses 22 to 25. I mean, the disciples are all wondering, who's the betrayer? Can you let us know, Jesus? So Peter makes a little gesture with his hand and calls John next to him. He's like, hey, ask Jesus who he's talking about. And then John leans up next to Jesus and says, which one of us are you referring to? And oh, you just gotta love that. Of course, it's also terrible, but I also really appreciate the contributions of Luke and Matthew. In Matthew, a upon hearing Jesus' announcement of betrayal, his disciples were very sad and began to say to him, one after another, "Surely you don't mean me, Lord." They were all heartbroken. Then, according to Luke, the situation developed into a dispute as to which of them was considered the greatest. What? Now, to be fair, you have to be careful when you mesh together all the Gospels. Each Gospel has a slightly different take, and the sequence of events slightly differs. But here they fit together pretty well. And the story they tell is the disciples discuss who would betray Jesus, and then they start arguing over who's the greatest. Like, how dumb can you be? But it makes sense in a way, if you're the greatest disciple, then obviously you wouldn't betray Jesus, right? I guess that's the logic that was going through their heads. I'm really not sure. But anyways, returning to the passage, verse 26 seems kind of weird to us modern readers. I mean, Jesus says, "Hey, the person I give this bread to will betray me." And then he just immediately hands the bread to Judas. So we're like, what? Why didn't the disciples pick up on this? Most of the commentaries I read explain it like this. Pardon me. The host of a feast, whose role was filled by Jesus, would dip into a common bowl and pull out a particularly tasty bit of bread and pass it to a guest as a special mark of honor or friendship. Because Jesus passed it to Judas, it has been suggested that he was seated near the Lord in the place of honor. So even though Jesus was identifying his betrayer, the disciples had this custom behind them. They thought Jesus was just honoring Judas, when in actuality he was announcing his betrayer. Another strange feature in the text is Judas' sudden departure. When Judas just up and left the feast after hearing Jesus' words, we're just like, wait, why didn't anyone stop him? Well, most commentators agree on this point as well. There were certain duties that you had to carry out around the Passover time. One of them was, buying food, and another was giving to the poor. So when the disciples saw Judas kind of exit the scene, they probably thought that's what he was up to, giving to the poor or buying more food. So hopefully that resolves some of the weirdness of that scene for you. I know it felt off to me. One final note before we move on. Yes, Satan entered Judas. Yes, the devil may have placed the idea to betray Jesus in Judas' heart, but Judas was not deprived of his will, at least not until he decided to sin for himself. He was chosen by God, and he was given the opportunity to believe, but he sinned terribly and embraced the darkness. This enabled the devil to enter him, and then night fell. Let's wrap up John 13. When Judas was gone, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and will glorify him at once. My children, I will only be with you a little while longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going you cannot come. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Simon Peter asked him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus replied, "Where I am going you cannot follow now, but you will follow later." Peter asked, "Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." Jesus answered, "Will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. I feel bad for everyone in this scene. Before we talk about Peter's denial, let's talk about verse 33. This verse marks the beginning of Jesus' farewell address. And although he doesn't say anything new and shiny in his farewell address, his instruction is extremely significant. If you're really familiar with the Bible, you may have noticed as you read through that the final words spoken by great leaders or great teachers of Israel are often recorded in Scripture. This is because the last words of these people was understood to embody the core of their teachings. So when Jesus says to love one another, he wasn't just playing around. This wasn't just, a casual reminder message. This was the heart of his teachings. And pay attention to how he says it. By this your love, everyone will know that you are my disciples. Then after Jesus' farewell address, we see another conversation between Jesus and Peter. Really, this entire chapter seems like it's just Peter saying, "No, Lord," and Jesus responding with, "Well, yes, actually." First there was the foot washing. "You shall not wash my feet." And Jesus says, "Yes, I will, unless you don't want to be part of me." And then there's the threefold denial, which Peter denied. But sometimes we Christians can behave in the same way as Peter. We profess our willingness to suffer and die for Christ, but then we dissociate ourselves from God at the critical moment. It's sad, it's tragic. I think we would occasionally benefit from putting ourselves in Peter's shoes, reminding ourselves that each time we sin, we disown Christ. But we shouldn't dwell on our failures too much. After all, the key lesson today, what Jesus really emphasized, is that we are to love one another as Christ has loved us. And in John's Gospel, Christ's love involved washing his disciples' feet and inviting Judas, his betrayer, to share an intimate meal with him. This sounds extreme, and I do think we should exercise some discretion before inviting the soon-to-be devil-possessed to our tables. But Jesus did some incredibly humbling, loving, and sacrificial things. He calls us to do the same. To wrap up this week, I encourage you to really think, to truly ponder, what type of love Jesus modeled for us in dining with his betrayer and washing dirty feet. How can we put such love into practice today? Just think about that this week.